If you're asking yourself, am I being abused? Chances are the answer is yes. But sometimes people aren't completely certain, especially when physical bodily harm hasn't occurred, or because they hold hope that things will change. That's why we created this video, to make it easier to identify abuse and abusers by explaining the types of abuse, patterns of behavior among abusers, common abuser traits, phrases abusers use, and other ways to identify when domestic violence is occurring. Sometimes the hardest part about abuse is recognizing and accepting that it is happening. You may realize after watching this video that what you're experiencing is abuse. That reality can be not only scary, but also sad. You may have held hope that things were going to get better. Unfortunately, abuse hardly ever gets better. If anything, it often escalates as time goes on. Acknowledging it, however, is the first step toward a safer, healthier life.
There are many common misunderstandings about what constitutes domestic violence. Having a better understanding of what domestic violence is can help you identify if you're experiencing it, or if someone you know is experiencing it. So let's begin today's conversation with a definition. Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another partner. This occurs through a systematic pattern of intimidation, manipulation, humiliation, isolation, fear, terror, coercion, threats, blaming, or injury to the victim. That's a mouthful for sure. Sometimes domestic violence is also referred to as domestic abuse, relationship abuse, or intimate partner violence. Regardless of the term, they all mean abuse that occurs between married couples, cohabitating partners, dating partners, or relatives, and can involve children or siblings. Domestic violence happens to people in all walks of life, regardless of age, gender, sexual orientation, race, religion, education, profession, or socioeconomic status. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men experience some form of domestic violence during their lifetime, either directly as a victim of abuse or by witnessing it as children. If you're currently experiencing it, it's important to realize many other people have gone and are going through the same adversity, and that help is available. We'll talk more about help options later in this video. The most common age that domestic violence first occurs for both women and men is between 18 to 24 years old, although it can be experienced at any age and can be ongoing, even affecting seniors. A frequent misconception is that domestic violence always involves physical bodily harm. Often it does involve physical violence, but it frequently also involves emotional abuse, sexual abuse, economic abuse, and spiritual abuse. Some of these forms of abuse, which involve name-calling, threats, possessiveness, distrust, or countless other tactics, can be more difficult to detect because they don't leave marks, bruises, or broken bones, and because they may be dismissed or downplayed by both the victim and the abuser, as well as those around them, when in fact they are forms of domestic violence.
Experts have identified behaviors used by abusers to gain power and control in relationships. These behaviors can make the victim feel fearful of their partner, feel at fault, feel like they are the crazy one, or feel like nothing can be done to satisfy their partner, even though these behaviors are really about an abuser justifying their actions to themselves and others. One such behavior is excuse-making, where an abuser gives excuses instead of accepting responsibility for their behavior, especially when confronted by others. Another is blaming, or shifting the responsibility for the abusive behavior onto someone or something else. Justifying includes a person explaining a behavior as necessary, unavoidable, or caused by factors outside the person's control. And redefining occurs when the definition of what's really going on is changed so that the focus is not on what the person did. Abusers build up their self-image by thinking that they are unique and better than other people, and by putting others down. Abusers frequently believe that they are not bound by the same rules as everyone else. They can be extremely sensitive when their self-image is challenged. Abusers also engage in lying or withholding information to gain an advantage. They may agree to things they have no intention of doing, intentionally sabotage plans, or instigate conflict. They can be impulsive, not think about the consequences of their actions, and tend to assume they know what other people are thinking, which allows them to justify their behavior based on what they assume are the motives of others. They use anger, threats, and violence to intimidate, or use dramatic tactics like walking out, shouting, and destroying property when they aren't getting their way in order to regain control. Abusers play the victim by appearing helpless, pretending to be unable to cope with situations, and complaining of persecution. They can be good actors outside of their relationship to perpetuate the perception among others that they are a decent, upstanding person. Abusers have trouble experiencing intimate connections with others, so they substitute action, excitement, uproar, or constant stimulation for closeness. They are often vague and unclear, or feign niceness or interest in other people's opinions in an effort to not reveal personal information or to avoid being discovered. They may minimize the impact of their behavior to make it seem less consequential, or even deny the behavior ever occurred. Now that you understand patterns of abusive behavior, let's talk about the words, phrases, and statements that victims commonly hear from abusers. Some of these phrases may be difficult to hear, so rather than saying them out loud, we'll simply animate them on this slide. The purpose of this video, after all, is to help identify when domestic violence is present, and knowing what to listen for is key. Another way to identify abuse is through the everyday actions of an abuser. It can be helpful to keep a log or diary of these actions your abuser uses. Since abuse doesn't necessarily happen every day and abuse can be separated by periods of normalcy, keeping track of how often they occur is a good way to raise your consciousness of what is actually happening, the frequency and intensity of what's actually happening, and it can help reduce effects of the abuser's denial and minimization of the abuse. A log can also be helpful in court when and if you need to prove the abuse. Of course, it's critical to make sure these records are kept in a safe place that your abuser can't find. Here are 30 common actions of abusers. Lack of compromise, subtle control, like encouraging you to dress in a certain way. Guilt trips, behavior that pressures you into things. A confrontational attitude. Unreasonable statements about how much they deserve or what they deserve. Stating that the whole world is against them. Denying their behavior, ignoring or downplaying your accomplishments, lack of trust in you, lack of respect for your feelings, sarcastic comments downplayed as jokes, extreme jealousy, withholding basic necessities like food, clothing, medication, and housing, controlling the family finances, unwanted or forced sex, silent treatment, control over financial resources, building you up, then breaking you down and repeating this cycle, blaming other factors for their actions, dishonesty, destroying property or valuables, interrogations about your day and whereabouts, sabotaging your friendships, isolating you from your support system, withholding birth control, not respecting your boundaries, misusing religious passages, not taking responsibility for their actions, showing disrespect toward former partners, a sexist attitude, or finding humor in sexist jokes, constant checking in, needing to know where you are at all times. If you've ever watched any crime drama on TV, the detectives always profile the criminal they're looking for. They list the height and weight, hair color, clothing, and mannerisms of the perpetrator. The same can be done for abusive partners. Although an abusive partner can look like anyone and be from any walk of life, abusers often share some similar traits that should give you pause before entering a relationship with them. These can include history of abuse in family, physically or sexually abused as a child, low self-esteem, untreated mental illness, prior criminal history, owns or is infatuated with weapons, fixated on bullying others, history of abuse in past relationships, lack of appropriate coping skills, codependent behavior, drug or alcohol abuse, is cruel to animals, tells sexist jokes, talks about commitment right off the bat. Just because someone shows one of these factors does not guarantee that they will become an abuser. However, in tandem, they should be noted and given attention. The difference between a couple who sometimes argues, even yells at each other, and a couple in which one person is an abusive partner is that abuse follows a pattern. It isn't a one-off event. In fact, many advocates agree that domestic violence follows something called the cycle of abuse, a 4-stage pattern that abusive behavior can sometimes take hundreds of times over. First, tensions build and a survivor can become fearful. The survivor may feel it's their duty to placate the abuser. Next, there is an incident. This can be any of the types of abuse we spoke of earlier. It might range from yelling to the silent treatment, hitting to lethal threats. After that, reconciliation, or the excuse stage occurs. An abuser may apologize profusely, bring gifts, act sweet, and promise it will never happen again. Or the abuser could blame the survivor or deny the abuse ever occurred. In some cases, the abuser may say nothing and pretend like the incident never happened. This is called gaslighting. Finally, there's the calm stage. This is when things seem to go back to normal, sometimes even better than before. Survivors sometimes refer to this as the honeymoon stage. Some survivors say their abusers skip this stage altogether and cycle right back to the first stage where tensions begin to build again. What's scariest is that the length of this cycle usually diminishes over time, bringing abusive incidents closer and closer together. This is called escalation.
For those struggling with an abuser, the good news is there are a tremendous number of resources available to help you. In fact, there are close to 3,000 domestic violence shelters throughout the US and Canada, covering nearly every imaginable region. You can find the one nearest you at domesticshelters.org, which offers its millions of visitors a year a searchable database of shelters, along with their contact information. Most local shelters offer a 24/7 hotline staffed with advocates who understand what you are going through and how to help. Additionally, there is the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which you can reach at 800-799-7233. You can call 24/7 or use their live chat feature online, both of which are anonymous, to speak with an advocate. There's also a hotline specifically for young people at 866-331-9474. More than 4 million people have called into these two national hotlines, which are free, just like local hotlines. If you're not quite ready to speak with someone and would rather learn about and process what you're going through, there are hundreds of articles, sorted by category, on a wide variety of topics at domesticshelters.org. Articles include how to create a safety plan, how to secure an order of protection, why you should document abuse, how to explain abuse to children, what to do if you have to go to court, how to heal after leaving an abuser, and more potentially life-saving topics. The website also lists recommended books and offers links to a number of self-assessments that can be taken privately to better understand a situation and your level of danger. By the way, as you explore domestic violence further, you'll likely hear the term survivor used in place of what others might refer to as a victim. Survivor is an empowering term domestic violence advocates, people currently experiencing abuse, and people who have successfully moved on from an abuser like to use because of what it implies. Above all, always remember, abuse is never your fault. You do not deserve to be with a partner who makes you feel unsafe or who harms you physically or emotionally. It is also up to you and you alone to decide when the safest time is to leave your abuser and plan your escape.